And I had a Polish girlfriend, a very nice person. Her name was Fela. She was, I think, already in the same private school I was at, and then later on I think she was also at the Lyceum. And it was in the 30s, and her name was Lipinski, I know that. And her father, I was at their home, which was not in an elegant area where we were. She was a nice, I liked her parents, they were nice. And Mr. Lipinski said to me one day, Lori, I know your father, he's a very nice man. Please tell him to get out now. We are leaving for Palestine, well that was in those days. And tell your father, he's a nice man, I know who he is. Get out. And I said, Mr. Lipinski, why don't you call my dad and tell him yourself? He said, Lori, I'm a Pole. And I know your father will not like it if I tell him what to do. Please tell your dad for me, give him the message. Well, I gave him the message. And of course my father said, what does that Pole know? We're Germans. And I thought, aha. And later on, I thought back, I thought, he was so right. Life, was very comfortable. But later on, little by little, you get these insidious things happening. I had a very good friend. Her name was Anna Marie, not Jewish. Very close. We always at our house. We were always doing our homework together, always together. And there was a time I didn't see her. I thought, oh my gosh, what's happening? I called, I didn't get the answer. So I was near my house, on the street, and I saw her. And I said, oh, Anna Marie, I am so happy to see you. She looked at me and spat in my face. I was 14, I remember that. And then I realized, and she laughed at me, and she was with two other girls, which I hadn't realized right away. Two other girls, brown shirt, brown skirt. I remember I was absolutely devastated. That was my good friend. I called her mother, and her mother said to me, Lori, listen to me and listen good. Do not try to get in touch with her. Don't ever call her. She's now a big Nazi. She belongs to the youth. My son is now in the Hitler Youth. And she said, don't ever try to call again. That was a wake-up call for me, I think. This was the very first incident when I was about 14. That was horrible. I never forgot that. It spat right in my face. She had gotten married, and my brothers didn't need her anymore. They were getting older. And I visited her. She lived in an apartment a little bit outside of town, one of those newer apartments. And I visited her 2-3 times, bringing her little gifts. And one day, I was there visiting her, and she said to me, she said, people in my apartment building are wondering, what is that little Jewish girl doing in your apartment? And I was probably 14 or 15. I knew exactly what she was telling me. And I remember I was so upset. I said, you'll never see me again, don't worry about it. And I walked out crying all the way home. I was so upset. I think I realized, without knowing, that that was the beginning of the end, Well, it was gradual, very gradual. In school, we had Jewish teachers. I remember one, and all of them, by the way, had to have doctorates in education in the Lyceum. And there was one woman, her name was Dr. Haberfeld. She was Jewish, and I don't remember what grade it was. She was, they substituted the Nazi teacher and sent her to the middle school, and we got this Nazi teacher. Her name was Dr. Niklas, miserable woman. And she came to, the very first time she came to our class. Oh, by the way, the Jewish kids had to sit in the back at that point. And I remember to this day what she did. She came into the class with Heil Hitler, and she went like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 Jewish girls were sitting in the back. And she said, I would like to tell the Jewish girls that, and we had to tell our name, they will not get a good grade in German because they're not Germans. I don't know what made me get up, because I was told not to talk back. I got up. I was very angry, and I said, Dr. Niklas, I'm very good in German. I have always gotten good grades in German. And if I'm good in my grade, I would expect that I should get a good grade. I don't know how I got the courage. I got a good grade. But I went and took a business course at the university. And I remember sitting in the classroom and by myself, and a young woman comes in, my age, 16. And she sat next to me, and I said to her, you don't want to sit next to me, I'm Jewish. She said, what has that got to do with it? I said, And I told her. She said, but I want to sit next to you. I'd like to be your friend. You were not allowed to be friends with non-Jews. But we became good friends. And I was stopped in the foyer of our building. This man said to me, who is that girl I saw you with? This man lived downstairs. He was a big Nazi, big.
In your apartment?
Big Nazi. I said, what are you talking about? I knew immediately what he was talking to. I said, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, you know perfectly well. I remember that to this day. He said, you know perfectly well what I'm talking about. I said, no, I don't. Well, he said, I can only tell you, if I ever see you again with her, there's going to be trouble. Well, I don't know if I took it seriously or not. We saw each other. A couple of 3 weeks later, he saw me again, and he said, you did not follow my instructions. I said, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, oh, yes, you do. He said, now I will tell you something. If I ever see you with this girl again, not only will you be in trouble, but so will her family. So I knew I had to just break it up. And I called her. She said, no, that's not right. I'm your friend. I said, I know you're a friend, but I don't want you on my conscience. I remember that I said that to her. I cannot have that. We can't see each other anymore because he really meant it. And that was the end of it. And to this day, I'm sorry I didn't try to find her. Her name was Elspeth Küssner. And I don't know why I didn't try to find her, but I didn't, I guess I forgot some of the incidents you try to forget. The youth group was our savior. There was no question about that. Because we all became very, very close. with one another. And our life centered around that youth group. But we were always together, and we were very, very closely in that group. And that saved us. It was, when I think back, it was our savior that we had that kind of relationship. And I mean, all of the youth group became so close. They were like family. We used to go to the beach. And then we were designated to have a piece of beach right near the Polish border. See, Danzig was very close to the Polish border, and we all had our passports. Sopot was a beautiful, beautiful, very elegant resort, sort of like Monaco, and right next to it was a border, and there was Olovo, which was the Polish part. So we were told to be at the Jewish beach, which was right next to the border. Well, funny thing, there was a fence, fenced off. God forbid you should contaminate the Germans. So funny thing, what we did, we didn't go there. We went across the border next to the Jewish beach and the Polish part. We would not go to that designated beach. And the border guards, well, they were Germans and the Polish, of course, knew us. And we didn't even have to show our passports anymore. They were very nice to us. So I mean, they didn't try to keep us back or anything, they just let us through. And after 2-3 times, they knew who we were, and we just showed the passport. And all of the youth group, most of them survived. Scattered all over. As I said, that Jewish group was our savior. It really was. And we were all closely knit because of the circumstances, I think. Well, they were concerned and they knew, but they didn't talk too much in front of us children, don't forget. We were not really, the conversations were mostly when we were not around. It was so subtle that little by little you didn't realize. I mean, I remember that we still had our maid. My mother later on said she had to let her go because she was not allowed to work for Jews. I mean, we knew we couldn't do this, we couldn't do that. We certainly couldn't go to certain areas. We didn't go, that's all. They had signs, Jew, do not buy, Jew. Yeah, you couldn't go anywhere. No, you could not. You couldn't go into the stores even. My mother told me that our old laundry lady that came to do the laundry did the shopping for her, to bring her stuff, because they were not allowed to go into stores. I remember, however, we went to the high holidays. We walked to the temple, and a lot of other Jews were, the Jewish were walking the same way. And that, maybe it was the last year I was there, the populace was watching us. They were on the sidewalk at the very edge, and I saw it from the window. And I told my dad, I said, Dad, we're going to get beaten up. He said, no, we won't. We weren't going to. He told my grandfather, Papa, you take the boys on either side, I'll take. And we all went to temple. They watched us silently and didn't do a thing. Now, they also were told by the Gestapo that they would burn the synagogue or something. So they rounded up all the men that served in World War I for Germany. And they told them to go to the temple, form a chain around the temple. They did. Nothing happened. But That was then. Later on, probably it would have happened. My father was a very honest man, and he was very highly thought of everywhere. There was one incident that tells you about my father, how they were regarding him. He was called before the Gestapo, and I was in 1937 or so. And that was a very, very, very serious situation. Most of the people never were seen again. And my father was taken to the police department, and he told us he went through a maze of rooms and hallways, and he thought that was it, you know. And he came in front of a desk, and some man was sitting behind the desk. And he looked up to the man who brought my father to this Gestapo guy, and he looked and he said, "This is Mr. Boss. Why did you arrest him?" And he gave some kind of answer. And the man said, "I know, Mr. Boss, you better let him go." That was, I think after that my father realized it was time to get out. Brother Walter and Peter went to England on a children's transport. Walter was 15, and Peter, he was a little over 13 after his bar mitzvah. We knew that was for Joint Distribution Committee in Hayes. They arranged it. And we had the list of children that could go. Don't forget, I was working at the Federation at the time. It must have been horrible for my parents. I can only imagine how terrible. And they got out, and they were assigned to families. My schooling was completed, but if I wanted to go on, I could have for 2 more years. It was like university here. I worked for the Jewish Federation, and oh my God, it was a wonderful job. The boss was belonged, well, he was kind of overseeing our youth group, and of course everybody knew each other. And the woman that used to work there told my mother they needed somebody, and I was working. I was apprentice, and I didn't want to leave actually. And I thought, and she said, "No, this is a wonderful job, take it." And I did. And it was a wonderful job, but a very difficult job, because we had a lot of people come to the temple in dire straits or whatever. And we put together an illegal transport. I don't know all the ins and outs of the transport, but it was done with the help of the Gestapo. And they went to Palestine, but they got stuck in Greece. And Gestapo came to our office. The home of the agent was next door, and they called and said, "We'd like for you to know Uncle Sam was visiting us." Well, that was Gestapo. And my boss, he was maybe 10 years older than I, maybe not even, about 10 years, was a dear friend. And he had a German citizenship. We had the Danzig citizenship, which was better. He had the German citizenship. And he said, "Lori, I'm going to ask you, you don't have to do it, but I have a letter, and that's going to be incriminating. If this Gestapo finds it on me and reads it, I'm done for." I was going to mail it in a Polish post office. "If you want to do that now before they come, you don't have to," but to me it was an adventure. It was not something that you think of consequences. So I went down, and it was maybe 10 minutes walking fast. I remember looking behind me, And I threw the letter in the Polish post office to the mailbox and came back. Gestapo was there. How come you're late? Germans are not late. If you are supposed to start your work at 8 o'clock, you're there on the dot. I said, oh, I'm sorry. And my boss said, oh, Miss Boss is late on Sundays. She always has parties to go to. And they gave me a big lecture, Germans are never late, blah, 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 blah. And he said, what's your name? I told him. He said, which of the bosses? Franz Boss? I said, no, George Boss. Aha. And he asked me questions. Where are you from? What are you doing? You know, things like that. I don't remember too much except that I was scared out of my mind. But I answered. And they left. So I said to him, yeah, I said, by the way I put it. They said, were you able to do it? I said, yeah. I was mostly typing a lot, letters, and I remember typing German letters, of course, to HIAS and Joint Distribution Committee, asking for funds for the illegal transports. And we had to interview them, and I guess the list went to the Gestapo. And they had an age limit. You could only be so-and-so old. I think it was maybe 50 at the most. And there was a woman there because she was over the age limit. And I remember this like today. She came to the office, and I said to her, you know, we have age limit. I cannot put you on the list. I mean, gee, I was 19 years old, a terrible thing for somebody to have that responsibility. And I talked to my boss about it, and he said, Lori, I just cannot do it. You got to help me here. So I did, and I said to this woman, I mean, you know, there's an age limit, blah, 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 blah. And she was crying, Karen, and crying. So I finally said, you know what? I'm going to put you on the list. To this day, I'm grateful I did that. I'm sure she was able to kind of slip through it, maybe. I'm quite sure she did, yeah. And it was a terrible thing. I know we realized how bad it was. We knew of the concentration camps. We knew about that. And you just try to push it away for every day in order to exist. You can't live with constant fear. Well, there was constant fear. I remember my friends left, and there were days I couldn't stop crying. I mean, I was just devastated. And I was also worried that I might not get out. And I don't know how I found out about what you call the domestic visa for England. I don't know exactly how that came about, but I knew I had to get out. I didn't exactly want to be a maid, but what difference it make? You got to get out. And I was first was a boarding house on Weston-super-Mare on the west side of England. Well, I didn't like that at all. It was a boarding house, and there were nice people in there. They knew I was a refugee, and they were really, but I had to sleep in an attic, and I mean attic. The roof was like this, no insulation. In the same bed with somebody else. I mean, in my life, I never could imagine it. And I wanted to get out of there. I mean, that was... And they begged me to stay. They said, another refugee girl is coming. And I met her, and she said, please stay. I said, no way, I'm not staying. I'm going back to London. And a friend of mine had also made on the same street. She had heard about this young family that wanted a refugee girl as a maid. And I worked there, which was very nice. They were very nice to me. They let me come in the front door, which nobody heard of. the maids had to go through the kitchen door, and they gave me the front door key, which was very nice of them. But I remember being on my hands and knees, putting paste on the floor, on the kitchen floor that was, the brick floor, and had to scrub it by hand. And I thought, what the hell am I doing? And then I thought, well, better than Auschwitz. I remembered that. But they were nice to me. They really were very nice to me. And on my day off, I met other refugee girls. There was a friend of mine. She was, two doors down. And other friends were in England. My very dearest friend was also in England. That was Ille. That was from Danzig. We called each other the twins. They all called us the twins. And she was also a maid. She was in a fancier place. She was in St. John's Wood, which is very fancy. Upstairs, downstairs maid, and cook. They're all refugees. The cook was from Vienna, and the other two girls from Germany. And I visited her. Yeah, it was strange. I mean, they waited on these people. They didn't. I remember that they wouldn't even pour the milk for themselves. And I was burglarized. I mean, this place was burglarized. And I had very nice jewelry. Every bit of it was taken. And I remember the guy from Lloyd's of London, the adjuster, came. And I wouldn't tell him that I had a lot of nice jewelry because we were not allowed to take anything out. Now, you talk about brainwashing. I realized later on what brainwashing really is. You don't realize it. So subtle. I would not tell him what I had. And I remember the woman saying, the woman I worked for, she said she had beautiful jewelry. She had a beautiful this brooch and cameo, blah, blah, blah. I wouldn't tell him. And he said, but this is not Germany. Please, the adjuster, pleading with me. I said, no. And the same thing happened. I was walking with my cousin. They were in England. They were doing very well. And I saw a bunch of young people coming toward me, young men. Bunch, 3, 4, 5. And I walked on the other side. Okay. Second time it happened again. And I started walking on and my cousin said to me, what are you doing? I said, well, she said, Lori, you are in England. Nothing's going to happen. And I think then I realized I was brainwashed. Mm-hmm. She said, but you're in England. Nothing's going to happen. I was at the home where my brother was staying with these people, and we were sewing blackout curtains right away. And I heard the King's speech. And I remember we were terribly upset, of course. My oldest brother was in Israel and first the Jewish Brigade and then the Haganah. My brother Walter was in the British Army, and Peter was at the university at the time. The secretary had promised it to my father. He had said to him, look, I will get Lori out. I can get her out, but she has to be patient. I can't get the visa right away. And the visa didn't arrive and didn't arrive. And I thought at the time, well, if I can't get out, at least I'm in England. And my cousins were doing very well in England. I had friends, so it was such a terrible thing. I thought, well, worst comes to worst, I'll stay here. But then the visa came through, and it was just at the nick of time. War had already been declared. I was booked on a Dutch boat through the Bloomsbury House in London, which was a Jewish agency. And the Dutch ship was immediately cancelled. That passage was cancelled. And the ship was sent by the Canadian government to pick up the survivors of the Athenia, which was bombed by the German U-boats. That was torpedoed. And the survivors were on this ship that they were all Canadians, that the Canadian government sent. And it went to Montreal. It docked in Montreal. In Montreal, the Jewish agencies have gotten in touch with the Jewish agencies in Montreal. And they picked us up from the ship, put us in limousines, please, with chauffeurs, chauffeured us around Montreal, was from the Jewish temple, I think, or agency. They gave us lunch at the temple. It was, I think, a Reformed temple, and put us on a train to America that same day. And the train went through Albany, New York, where we immigrated. The apartment building was sold. Our friends owned it, very close friends. They lived downstairs. They owned it and they sold it. They had a big furniture store, and they sold it. They also got out. I think they went to England. And they moved, but it was in the same area for some reason or another. And my mother told us that Gestapo came to their apartment. And I don't know what they did or didn't do. They searched. They must have said something. My grandfather opened his jacket and said, "If you want to shoot an old Jew, if that makes you happy, go ahead, shoot me." And my mother said, "I thought I would die." She was scared out of her mind. They left him alone. Yeah, but my grandfather had guts. He really did. I mean, it was amazing. I often wondered about how I would react, but you don't. And then, of course, everything fell apart, little by little. And he had one close friend. His name was Eugen Müller. He came to dinner many, many times. And we called him Uncle. And he came to the house, and he was the one that actually saved my parents. Oh yeah, he came, all of a sudden he had a big swastika. And my mother said, "Eugen, when you come to my house, I don't want to look at the swastika." So he put underneath, okay. But his son became a huge Nazi leader. And he was the one, he sent his son to my father, and he said, "Uncle George, get out tonight. They're picking up all the Jews and sending them to the concentration camp." That's when they got out. And he said, "Don't take much with you because they'll, watch you." So they took just a small suitcase and went to my aunt in Berlin, of all places. But she was still there, and she was able to give them money that she had at home. And he had to be left behind because he couldn't, he was already around 90, I think, and they put him in the home for the aged. And I got a telegram here that he had pneumonia and died, fortunately. Was buried, well, the reason I know that is because he was buried in a Jewish cemetery. That's what the wire said. So I knew that he died a natural death. 6 weeks later, the home was taken into cattle cars. So I was always grateful, yeah. And they bought into an illegal transport that's supposed to have gone to East Palestine. But there was a Greek ship owner, and he had no intention of going through the British blockade. and he dumped them in Benghazi. And from there on, they were arrested, and they were put in camps, and then they shipped them to Italy because the Rommel forces were in, North Africa. They shipped them to Italy, and they were in a camp, and they put the refugees in different areas, and they had to go to the police every day to tell them where they were, which was okay. The Italians didn't do anything. And my parents were in Paramonte, and I think it was in the south of Italy. We were able to write, but during the war we couldn't. Mm-hmm. I didn't know where they were.
Yeah.
Roosevelt gave an order to pick up 1,000 refugees in Italy, and my parents came over on a ship, and that's how they came to America. Well, they were put in a camp in Oswego, New York, and they were supposed to go back in a year. They had to learn English, the theater. They were safe, at least. And then later on, the agencies vouched for them, Hires, Joint, and B'nai B'rith, I think, all of them. They got visas and stayed, Finally, I got through the Red Cross. They got in touch with me. And I went to Oswego, and they were in the camp, and it was an army camp. And it was very sparsely furnished, but they were here. And I stayed there for about 3 weeks to visit them. And during the visit, when I was there, Mrs. Roosevelt came with Mrs. Morgenthau to visit the camp. And she didn't like the way the conditions. She thought it should be more homey. And my mother was asked to wait on Mrs. Roosevelt for the lunch, and she was so excited. Yeah. And I tell you, Mrs. Roosevelt came, a fashion, you could not call her a fashion icon. And she had a black dress on, I remember. And I remember the refugees were better dressed than she was. Yeah, but she was a wonderful woman. Anyhow, they dissolved the camps and they became citizens. I guess we're very fortunate.